want to specify equal because sometimes I know that can be a little
That's another
dysfunctional when it's not.
Show.
But when there's only one, I mean, that person really has to carry the weight, and couple that with the stress of being all by yourself and being single, and it's easy to kind of go back off a little bit and say, well, we're in a tough situation. That kind of buys us a little bit of sympathy, or the child really is more of in a contemporary role or a friend role, and you can't really have that because there's going to be times that's going to be cut. That's going to come to task. So living high integrity is very, very crucial. So having that relationship with God, the devotion of time, and the integrity.
Yes.
Doing what you say, and boy, when the time comes that it's time to deliver, that you do that.
Yes.
But hard.
Hard, yes.
Absolutely.
And the
hard.
Communication. I think, that open communication, that is imperative. That's imperative. Big challenges that your mom faced. What were some of the huge challenges that she faced?
Looking back and even being a little bit aware of it at the time is the loneliness of really having all that weight
yes,
on you. We lived in the town that she grew up in, and my grandparents lived in that same city. So she was blessed in that there was a good support system, and also lots of friends.
Babysitters you didn't have to pay because they're family.
Yeah, that comes in handy.
Trust.
I realized that when we started having our kids 5.5 hours away from family, I was like,
it's time to move.
It's time to get a little closer to that way again. But I would still say there was a lot of loneliness there, in just that while there was a support system that goes so far,
yes,
and then ultimately it's your baby, literally and figuratively, and you see that, and I think kids see that, and I think because they see it, it's even more important that single parents are mindful that I can only show so much. And it's one of the things my mother will confess now, is that she said, there were so many times that I said, they can't see me cry, they can't see me, and it's not that we never did, but it was pretty limited. And she said, well, it would have been a lot more, but I can't do that.
And I think it was that era then. People was like, you had to be tough. But I think I think that puts that unity closer. And I think, you're coming from a real place. And then you're teaching them that crying is a part of cleansing. And sometimes we cry, we fall down, but we get up.
Yeah, that's a good point, because those times where, you knew that it was a tough time. It did come across, that's not anything weak.
No.
That's just, that's where you are, and that's how you're dealing with things, and you know what? This too will pass.
This too will pass, yes.
And as a testament to that support group, I can recall one of my mother's friends being over, and we were, just really trying to find the buttons to push, as kids do, and
especially when there are guests there, or when you get on the telephone.
Oh yeah, and I can remember her sitting down and going, "Look here, your mother, da 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 da," and I remember to this day that conversation. In terms of you guys, she won't tell you this, but she's carrying a lot of weight and a heavy burden, but it's because she loves y'all, and at that point, you're sitting bolt up, going okay, but that was what needed to be heard at the time. Those would be the three, and you're right that you could go into subsets, and there's lots of things that need to be there that are very firming, and those challenges, from the support system, I think that's tantamount. And I just, and one of the things that makes me pray, for single parents, especially when they're in a situation where there's not a lot of support,
Yes.
Is you really have to try to seek that out as best as possible, responsibly, but as best as possible, because it's pretty crucial to have a sounding board or an ear to speak into, or somebody praying for you, or
Yes. I know that
what
you're
have
not
you.
alone. That
Right.
other single parents are dealing with the same issues and challenges that you're being faced with.
Absolutely.
So we've reached back and we've talked about your upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about your adoption process.
Yes.
You and your wife Janet adopted 2 wonderful girls from China. And I'm sure there's someone watching and maybe you can't have a child. So it's very interesting, and I'm very excited that this is the encouragement piece. And Jim is going to talk about the adoption process and what that was like for the 2 of you.
Tremendous blessing. We
sure.
had talked about adoption to some extent. We'd been married about 7 years before we
Okay.
adopted. And we had talked about it to some extent. But really, it was almost like God was preparing us, because of it. At one point in my life, I can imagine the conversation coming up and going, I don't think I'm called to that. But then by the time we got there, we knew that we knew. We had kind of set a time. My wife had worked for the March of Dimes at one time, and of course she said, there's probably a certain age that after that, it's a little bit more dangerous, and maybe that's a wise time, as we've talked about this adoption, that really, maybe that's how God would work through this, that in this window, if nothing happens, then maybe we're called to do that. But the funny thing, God kind of used that time, and by the time that date happened, and we didn't have any children biologically, it was like we were ready. It was like, good, here's the date. Now it's time to go. We're going to adopt. And we did. We went to China. Completely a God thing. I had no connection. We had no connection with the country, had not really thought about it or sought it out, had not even decided, domestic or international. It's just that we saw some information about the Chinese program, and it just, I can't explain how he moves. I mean, it just was laid on us that is where we're going to go. So that's the program that we went and pursued, and we put our paperwork in, did it over New Year's weekend of 2000, and we adopted our oldest daughter in July of 2001.
And how old was she?
11 months.
Oh,
So she was a young one.
And your second? How old was she?
Second, an interesting thing, we had initially thought we were only going to adopt one. God had different plans. He didn't give any peace on that.
Okay.
It was like, there's not a period at the end of the sentence, just a comma.
Yes.
So we prayed about
continue.
it and said, we really are. I mean, we need to go again. We're called to go again. So we went in 2005. And our youngest was 21 months, so she was older.
Okay.
She was just shy of 2 years old.
Now, how long did the actual process take? I mean, the paperwork and how long?
It varies.
Yes.
It varies. The first time was about 1.5 years. The second time was only about 10 months.
Okay. And you hear the variable here, because a lot of times, a lot of the families can get very discouraged. I've worked in the field, and a lot of times parents are seeking foster care children, and it can be very, very challenging.
It can, and
the wait period, you think, well, maybe I'm not supposed to do this, so don't, hang in there, and this is great because we can see 10 months and then 1.5 years. Right. So it does take time sometimes.
I think that's the toughest part of it. It's not really a difficult process, it's just kind of a laborious process, and even now there are some countries that are as long as 3.5, 4 years. There's other programs. It all depends on that individual nation and its program. And I speak internationally because that's just the area I have more knowledge about. It varies on country, but God will see you through that. And I'll tell you, just this past week, had an email from a friend who they had been on the list. He had an email, I think 4 years, 6 weeks, and 2 days.
Wow.
So apparently they were counting. And they finally got their referral, and they are just, on cloud nine. They've seen that picture, and now they're ready to go.